Namaskar, Nileshok here, and welcome to Waves Conference 2022. As you must have noticed, we have always have panel discussions as part of the conference. This time, again, this is not a new or any innovative format. You would have seen the interviews in the past conferences, but this time I thought I will do something new or different from a multiple individual panel discussion. So think of this as a panel discussion, except we have two individuals here. And I'm very happy to welcome and to introduce to you those of you who have not heard him before or read his book. You have every reason to go grab that book called Yuganta. You see that in the background. But let me welcome Sri Jivan Rao, a young 23-year-old original researchers par excellence. Welcome, Jivan Rao.
Namaste, Nilesh and namaste to the organizers of this conference, and my namaste to the viewers of this conference.
All right, Jivan, and to get to right to the point, so great book. I have read it. I have a copy of it here. This is from Amazon. In fact, it's as it happens, it's a preview copy, so few months old. But let me get to right into the subject. So you have written this book on Yuganta, and that Yuganta is in the sense of referring to the end of Dwapara Yuga and beginning of KaliYuga. Now, I'm going to start saying we all know, because if you talk to anyone, okay, any random Indian Hindu person or people who are well familiar with Hindu civilization or ancient Indian narratives and so on, they will say, yeah, what about it? I mean, everyone knows it's there in the Panchang. If you take the Indian almanac calendar, Indian calendar, doesn't matter which one, Kala Nirnay, Date Panchang, Nirnay Sagar, any other Panchang, yeah, it's there. If you go to a mandir, if you go to a certain sampradaya, the sampradaya text would have it. Even think of like a somewhat broader organization such as, say, Vishwa Hindu Parishad. And I remember when they actually started it, it so happens, I was very young, but I remember they creating this word Yugabda, referring to Yugabda and the year. And that year right now, I don't know exactly what it will come to, but it's easy to find out, that I'm going to refer to. So they even publish a calendar called Yuga of the 5000 something, and the year would keep on changing, of course. So what I'm saying is, deep in the Indian psyche of ordinary people, but also the so-called intellectuals, and reason I'm using the word so-called is not in any negative fashion, but because even the so-called Indian intellectuals have not given any research thought to this until, for example, you have done it, and there may be a few others, but simply have accepted, okay, and never thought what is the implication of that assumption, which is so prevalent, so common, which is namely that Dwapar ended and KaliYuga began in 3100 O2 BCE. So let me take this position. If you agree with this, if you agree with 3102 BCE, just like most of the Indians are or Hindus are going to say, yeah, is that a question? Everyone knows it. So if you agree with it, then why there is a need for a book stating the same?
Okay, now I'm glad that you brought up the mentioning. I mean, you mentioned Vishwa Hindu Parishad and Panchangs, right? Using 3102 BCE date. So that usage in the Panchangs should actually give us a clue about the practical application of this date. So I would say this 3102 BCE is used precisely for calendrical or timekeeping purposes. So as long as 3102 BCE is used as a marker for timekeeping purposes, all well and good. The problem starts when anyone links this 3102 BCE with the beginning of Kali Yuga of Mahabharata. So my book Yuganta actually demonstrates the problem that arises when anyone links this 3102 BC with the dating of Mahabharata.
Got it. Got it. So what you are saying is 3102 BC from a Panchang perspective as a starting marker, as some reference, not unlike say Vikram Samvat or Shalivan Samvat, or there are many other Samvats that are listed, not an issue. In fact, hey, perfectly become familiar and use it. But you are saying because of the word attached to this 3102 BC as a KaliYuga, and of course you see the whole discussion of KaliYuga beginning, I mean, discussion in the Mahabharata, and that's what I want to ask you, but also the starting of a KaliYuga connected with Bhagwan Krishna and so on, and that causes the confusion. That's what, if I understood you correctly. I want to ask you two questions there. So you are saying thinking of 3102 BCE in the context of a Mahabharata time or as the time of Mahabharata is not correct. If so, my question is why it is not correct? And then the second part of that question is then who created this myth of Kali Yuga in 3102 BCE?
Okay. So let me first give you one additional detail. Okay, when we say Kali Yuga at 3102 BCE, what most of the folks or everyone, what they say is, what they mean is 18th of February 3102 BCE. This date is very important. It is 18th of February 3102 BCE. Okay, so now let's dissect the importance or significance connected with this date. Okay, so chronologically speaking, we can like identify 2 points. One is according to mainstream belief, Sri Krishna's nirvana happened on this date.
Okay.
And secondly, Kali Yuga began on this date. And the third point that we need to understand is 18th February 3102 BC was on Ashwini Nakshatra. Okay, now you can condense this into two informations: chronology information and astronomy information. Okay, so chronologically, what does that mean? Sri Krishna's nirvana happened 36 years after the Mahabharata war. And if Kali Yuga began on this date, that means Kali Yuga began 36 years after the Kurukshetra war. And astronomically, what it signifies is Kali Yuga began on Ashwini Nakshatra. So, like very interestingly or surprisingly, the Mahabharata text emphatically contradicts both of these claims. So that is the reason why I say this 3102 BC connection with Mahabharata is not correct.
Okay.
And coming to your second question, it's actually not such a easy question to answer, because there is a lack of resources to dig upon, actually, to find the person responsible for this connection. But with the available resources, with the evidence that I have come across, the current research, my research is pointing towards Bhaskaracharya I of 6th century CE as the originator for this link between 3102 BC and Kali Yuga. So you can say like from the past 1500 years, this connection of Kali epoch and 3102 BC is in existence.
So I would say this is, Jeevan, this is actually a great revelation for me, I would say, is that I always wondered where this 3102 BC and the connection with the Kali Yuga, but also and therefore with the Mahabharata came from. And yes, as you said, we can only talk of the evidence that we have. Nyadarshana says, Pramanataschartha Pratipatte, and also we cannot talk of the evidence. Pramanataschartha Pratipatte means we can only talk of the evidence we have. The other side of that, actually, the next sutra, it says, Anupapatti Upapatti Bhyam, which is to say, you cannot talk of the evidence that you don't have, and say, well, but why we don't have that evidence? You can talk as long as you want, you don't have it. So great answer. My quick comment, this is not to digress the subject, but so it will be very interesting as a research project, and not for you, not for me, for somebody else. And why I say somebody else, because people are always looking for interesting project. And now I'm suggesting one, and I bet nobody's going to do it. That's how the tamas is been filled here. it will be very interesting to go before the time of Bhaskara 1 and to see any reference, any connection with 3102 BC and KaliYuga. So that would be very interesting because you have specifically found a reference from Bhaskara 1 connecting this 3102 BC in the context of Aryabhata's statement and commentary on Aryabhata and the KaliYuga. But let me ask you the question somewhat related to that, but not necessarily because Puranas are always updated. But what do Puranas have to say? Because a average person is going to say, but isn't this all given nicely and beautifully, this 3102 BC connection and Kali Yuga and Mahabharata and Krishna and so on? Isn't it all beautifully, nicely given in the Puranas and Mahabharata? I'm saying that's at least the people's unspoken, unwritten assumption that it is already there. Somebody has figured it out for us. So my question to you, what do Puranas say? And what does Mahabharata say about the beginning of Kali Yuga?
Excellent. So, I would also like to add one more point here.
Please.
So when I discuss with other interested folks, right? So they usually start with saying Mahabharata says Kali Yuga start with the Krishna's Nirvana and it's 3102 BC. So I asked them, please give me the reference. So almost every time the reference they give is from Bhagavad Purana,
of course,
not from Mahabharata.
Yeah.
So people should understand there is a very distinct difference between Bhagavad Purana and Mahabharata. So now coming to your question, there is no one answer or one claim from the Puranas. In fact, there are multiple contradictory or sometimes conflicting traditions related to Kali Yuga from the Puranas. So I can summarize it into 5 points. Okay, first one is Sri Krishna being born after the advent of Kali Yuga. Second one is Kali Yuga already in effect during the time of death of Kalayavana. That is the second thing. And third one is Kali Yuga began with the Kurukshetra war. I mean near the Kurukshetra war. And fourth one is Kali Yuga began with the return of Sri Krishna to Vaikuntha, Krishna's Nirvana. And fourth one, very interestingly, this is from Garuda Purana, which says Buddha was born at the junction of Kali Yuga. So Garuda Purana does not specify which junction this one is. I mean junction of Dwapara and Kali or Kali and Krita. But this is the one claim from the Purana. So we saw there are 5 different claims. These 5 claims are only chronologically significant. Okay, there are still astronomical aspects to any date that we want to find, right? And also historical connections, like connection between Chanakya, Mahapadmananda, Parikshit, those things. So just right now, I have not gotten into those points. Just chronologically itself, there are 5 different claims in the Puranas. However, coming to Mahabharata, there is only one tradition, only one claim, according to which Kali Yuga began on the 18th day of the Kurukshetra war and on Pusha Nakshatra.
Okay.
That's it. Simple one-line tradition from Mahabharata.
Right. So I want to ask you the next question, but before that, just based on my experience, I will say something. For example, you have done a very exhaustive research trying to find every single reference. And you mentioned there in that context, even somewhere you found the reference, I think Garuda Purana you mentioned, which says Buddha was born at the intersection of a Yuga. And you said it doesn't say exactly which Yuga, which intersection. Is it the Kali Yuga and the later next one, whatever, or between Dwapara and Kali? The reason I'm bringing that up, you will find this interesting, and it will be interesting to see after, people listen to this. The subject is Kali Yuga, subject is Mahabharata, and the confusion with this. But you will find, and this is Samartha Ramdas Swami has discussed this. I'll come to that in a second. You will find people will forget everything else that you have said or I am asking. And they will say, oh, this is very interesting. Buddha being born at the intersection of some Yuga. and they will just go on that tangent because that's not even relevant in either way. You are just giving something that you found in the Purana. So that kind of should caution people when they look at a Purana, or for that matter, any text, including Mahabharata or something that doesn't make sense. You have to analyze it. The reason I mention is this I experience in related to my research all the time. And it used to frustrate me until I came across Samartha Ramdas Swami's verse. And I'm going to ask you the next question related to Samartha Ramdas Swami. So I'm just taking that as a good segue.
Okay.
Where Samartha Ramdas Swami in his Dasbodh, he says, Samula Grantha Pahilya Vina, this is in Marathi, Ugacha Tevizo Dushana, Guna Sangata Avaguna Paheto Padatamurkham. A learned fool is someone, okay, because they may know little bit of everything. When a certain subject is being discussed, and in that context, if some other offshoot comes up, okay, they will forget the main subject and go in that tangential direction. So I thought, like, people will forget 3102 BC and a Mahabharata and a connection and the confusion and the great work you have done to remove that confusion. And they will say, oh, what about the Buddha? Tell me more about the Buddha. Don't be surprised. And even after my warning in this interview discussion, you'll be amazed how many people will come and still bring up that subject. That's how the nature of it is. But let me ask you, so I have read the book. I mean, I have read it and multiple times, actually. This is meant to be read multiple times, by the way, guys, those who are listening to this. So Jivan, I am convinced of your work, okay? But my question to you, like, the majority of the individuals, majority of population, Indians, Hindus, people familiar with the Sanatana tradition, give whatever name you want to call it, they have internalized this 3102 BC, okay? And if we use the reference of Bhaskar 1 now that you are saying, assuming that's where it started, because that reference is clear, we just don't know if there is any previous reference to it. So let's say that this, I'm going to call it a dogma of 3102 BC, that confusion with the Mahabharata that began, say, 1500 years ago, time of Bhaskar 1. Okay. I mean, your work is great to correct the course. Okay. But ordinary people, and ordinary meaning, I'm not saying illiterate, ordinary people in all walks of life, okay, in academia, industry, as public intellectuals. But, yeah, so as Bhagavad Gita says, yad yad acharati sreshta, they say, hey, I'm not expert in this. I'm simply going to follow my guru. I'm going to follow whatever my sampradaya says. I'm going to follow what my professor says, what academics book says, or what the majority says. That's a very unfortunate, like people want to use the consensus. Friedrich Nietzsche talks about it. I'll not digress. But even bringing it to our tradition, think of I mentioned Samartha Ramdas Swami not that long ago, 400 years ago, 17th century, guru of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Or take Madhvacharya, of the Vaishnava Dvaita Sampradaya, what is that, 12th, 13th century. Both of them the way they refer to it, and I'll not go into the detail of references, but I'm sure you know those references. They refer to the KaliYuga, or when the KaliYuga began, or in case of Madhvacharya, referring to even the time of Mahabharata. And both of them, if you do the calculations, we can find out that they are referring to 3102 BCE. So what is, how do we overcome this dogma for our civilization, and how can we correct the course?
Okay. Bit complicated question, though. I have to thread a bit carefully here when we are talking of Star Wars like Madhvacharya or Samartha. So
Right.
I will begin by saying, we have to understand that be it any person, right? Like he is a product of his time.
Sure.
Right now, Sri Madhvacharya was a product of his time. Samarth Ramdas Swami was a product of his time. And you mentioned it previously that from past 1500 years we had this link of Kali epoch and 3102 BC. So that means even during the time of Sri Madhvacharya, it was already 600 years since this tradition of Kali and 312 BC has started.
Correct.
And 600 years is not a small time for any tradition to get actually entrenched. So to give a small example, you might know that if you ask any Hindu or Dharmic person about Sita's kidnapped by Ravana. Okay, so one almost constant aspect that comes is Sita crossed the Lakshman Rekha.
Correct.
Right? Or when Ram starts his search for Sita, always Shabari eating and then giving the fruit to Sri Ram comes.
Correct.
But you might be knowing, for interestingly, this actually came into existence only around 600 years ago.
Correct.
From Tulsidasa's Ramacharitmanas.
Correct. Correct.
So you see, in the span of 600 years, this particular claim or tradition has already become entrenched with traditional folks.
Yeah.
So we should remember that KaliYuga was already linked to 3102 BC, 600 years before Sri Madhvacharya's time. So that's actually one part of answer for your question, like how come Madhvacharya used 3102 BC. But also interestingly, Madhvacharya also partly diverts from the traditional claim, because in his work Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnay, Madhvacharya writes that KaliYuga began on the last day of the war, which is different from the traditional claim of KaliYuga starting from 36 years after the war.
Correct.
But interestingly again, he still continues with 3102 BC KaliYuga. So what can be the reason? I mean, why didn't Sri Madhvacharya see a problem with Ashwini Nakshatra of February 18, 3102 BC?
Right.
So for this, again, you previously brought this point, right? So folks tend to follow the experts, or folks tend to follow their gurus. Right. So in Puranas, we see multiple places where KaliYuga is called as Pushya Yuga. But Puranas does not give a reason why KaliYuga is called as Pushya Yuga. So my guess or my conjecture, you can say, is Madhvacharya did not see a problem with Ashwini Nakshatra of 3102 BC because Puranas does not give a explanation why KaliYuga was called as Pushya Yuga. However, luckily, Mahabharata very clearly, very explicitly says that KaliYuga began on Pushya Nakshatra.
Okay, very, very interesting. And you said it very well that we all, I mean, all our great predecessors, they too, but no exceptions, we, all of us, are a product of our time. For example, if we just go 100 years ago, many people ask me, Lokmanya Tilak, and his Arctic Home in the Vedas or Orion. And you get, if you read it, I mean, phenomenal individual. But if you read it, you get the sense that he's sort of softly accepting the Aryan, not Aryan invasion the way understood by the leftist and communist and the idiots, but he is directionally accepting it. Therefore, even when he writes Arctic Home in the Vedas, he's saying, okay, so those people possibly were in the Arctic area, of course, different climate. The point is at that time, whatever research he has access to from different multidisciplinary science and the main prominent thought, he just accepted it, as a foundation. So that could be the case for, I mean, this is not their main area of focus for, say, Swamartha Ramdas Swami or Madhvacharya. By the way, you just mentioned and something comes to my mind. See, I have like 35 plus years of very close connection with Hare Krishna movement, like what we call ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And Srila Prabhupada has also very clearly stated, and I think you mentioned it somewhere in your book, if not maybe in the blog, that Srila Prabhupada also says in his purport in no uncertain terms that the KaliYuga began on the last day of the war. Now this is very interesting because people, how, even when, say, take Hare Krishna movement as an example, even when your guru is saying something, otherwise they will use that argument. They meaning, I don't mean ISKCON, I mean people in general. They will use the argument of a panchang or their sampradaya, their matha, their tradition, their professor, their guru. But they have, I mean, we all of us have to introspect how you are actually figuring this out. Because if you are so emotionally attached to something, then you won't even listen to your guru. And I'm mentioning this just as a digression, but very relevant to this point, because I have discussed this with many Hare Krishna devotees who are my good friends. And there also they kind of a pause. Even when Prabhupada is saying, and I will quote that reference, and they will say, interesting, but they are in their emotional state, in their repetitive hearing, they are convinced and they don't want to even change. Okay. But with that, let me ask you the next question. So Bhaskaravan is saying something, likes of Samartha Ramdas Swami, Madhvacharya are possibly following that assumption of a Bhaskara, and that kind of can create a confusion, because it kind of confusion in the sense that people say, oh, Madhvacharya is also saying it, Samartha Ramdas Swami is also saying it, so the confusion can continue. And you are making, you have made, not making, it's already a past, you have done it, and I'm impressed. But for the benefit of the audience, in your words, how does your work on this timing of KaliYuga differs from everything else that is written to this day about the beginning of KaliYuga? If you can say it, summarize it.
Okay. So to start with, there have been a number of attempts in the past to find the dating of Kali Yuga, and using that date to find the date of the Mahabharata war. Right. So I can say my work or my book is different from those attempts because I have like entirely relied on the internal evidence of the Mahabharata text. I have considered Mahabharata text as the final word on anything related to Mahabharata. And my work is different from those of the past because I have not cherry picked any single reference from any single Puranas and based my entire claim on it. In fact, I have, since you have read my book, you would know that I have used 10 plus Puranas actually in my book. The traditional claims of Kali Yuga from 10 plus Puranas and discussed them in my book. Right. And I have extracted like every single Yuga reference that I can come across and based my conclusions on those large number of evidence. So you know, right? I mean, while plotting a graph, higher the number of points, higher the accuracy of the plot. Because or else, if you have just one point, you can draw in any direction in that one point. To draw a meaningful straight line, you need at least 2 points. For a curve, you need 3 points. So higher the number of evidence, accurate or consistent will be your conclusions. So I would say like my conclusions are consistent because it's based on 100 evidence just from Mahabharata text.
Right. No, great point. Now, what happens, Jivan, is the ordinary people. And again, when I say ordinary people, I don't mean, how do I say it? I grew up in a village and I can relate to that. I'm not talking the people of the villages, for example. I mean, I grew up in multiple villages. No, they are actually amazingly, I mean, in India, I've seen it, amazingly grounded. They may not know the details. They will not able to tell you 3102 BC as this. The problem is with the learned folks, and of course the learned fool comes out of they can only come out, what Samartha Ramdas Swami calls it, the murkha and padata murkha. Padata murkha is a learned fool, murkha is just a fool, So learned fools can only come out of a learned people. So that's when I say ordinary, even I'm referring to learned people. What happens is, you said you have taken all the evidence, very exhaustive evidence, great. But what happens is, at least as a lip service, and now because now you're connecting this with Mahabharata, I will talk about the Mahabharata area that where I have worked for a long time. These, let's say, Mahabharata dating researchers, okay? All Mahabharata dating researchers are aware, okay, that majority of them, that their claims are not corroborated by Mahabharata evidence, okay, be it the year of Mahabharata war, be it the year of beginning of Kali Yuga. But as you may know, many actually start their research for the dating of Mahabharata with this 3102 BC. I mean, that's the very subject why you began, that's why we are starting. But what they will do is, now I don't know, Jivan, if they do it deliberately or if they do it because what you just said, like, hey, all evidence, I mean, it's a common sense that we should take all exhaustive evidence and then basically do the classification saying which one matches and which one doesn't match. I don't know if this is because of ignorance. I mean, that would really shock me, or it's some deliberate agenda, but they will ignore this. I'm talking Mahabharata dating researchers. So these are not even ordinary, some people, folks with the degrees, but even who claim to be researchers. Well, I'll give you a couple of scenarios. They will ignore the Mahabharata text itself in dating Mahabharata, but they will embrace the Purana evidence. They will ignore the Mahabharata statements, okay, which can be objectively tested. But instead, they will embrace, say, what is written on an epigraph, okay, which cannot be objectively tested. But even worse, that the epigraph also needs some interpretation. When it says a shaka, we need to understand which shaka the epigraph might be referring to. Or one has to understand whatever is written on epigraph is also somebody's assumption. Okay, that is not some like a golden truth that is been given. Just like even the statements of Mahabharata, the way I have done research, I don't take a statement of Mahabharata and just because it's there, it's true. I mean, we have to still show how it is true. So my point is, people use different types of evidence. Now, if you ask, and I have done it now, I have almost like stopped asking, I just say what I want to say. If you ask why they ignore Mahabharata evidence for determining the events related to, say, Mahabharata, like a dating or specific event, they say, then only in retrospect, they will say the text that we have today, for example, say Mahabharata text, has interpolations and Pathaved. Now, the funny thing, I don't want to make the questions bigger or turn that into a comment. The funny thing is, they forget that what they are just claiming as interpolations or Pathaveda equally applies to Puranas, equally applies to their epigraphs, because epigraphs can be based on somebody's assumptions, okay? Something like this. Problem is, Jivan, the ordinary folks are confused, or confused enough, I would say, or convinced enough by this time. They say, okay, I'm just going to follow this guy. I'm going to only read this book. What can you say about these attempts of Indic researchers to circumvent the primary text? Now, in this case, because we are discussing KaliYuga and its connection with Mahabharata, is because it's related to Mahabharata, I would say Mahabharata text. But a broader question is, what will you say about these attempts of Indic researchers to circumvent something like Mahabharata text on the ground that they have Pathaveda and interpolations as if they don't exist anywhere else, while blindly trusting, say, Puranas or epigraphs, or even later Indic narrations? They will trust the Greek records more. What will you say to those folks, and what are your thoughts on this?
So I would start by saying there is actually nothing wrong in accepting Puranic statements or epigraphs. As a matter of fact, I have actually used 10 plus Puranas and multiple other Indic narratives in my own book, like Surya Siddhanta, Aryabhatiya, Bhaskariya, and book of Swami Yukteswar. But it's important to understand the nature of those evidences that we collect from Puranas or other Indic narratives. They are only secondary evidence. They can only be used for corroborations. You cannot base your entire theory on secondary evidence. So my claim is very simple. Mahabharata text is the primary source for anything and everything related to the Mahabharata. Mahabharata text reserves the right to be the first text to be analyzed for anything related to Mahabharata. You can base your theory on any other source only when Mahabharata fails to provide a reference, when Mahabharata fails to provide any information related to that subject. So that's my claim.
Okay. So before going to next question, well, actually, I'm going to go to the next question. But what I mean is, I wanted to change the gears. But I want to ask you what you just said related to that, two questions, and just give me the answers for fun as only yes and no. You either say yes or no. You just said, like, people because the KaliYuga, at least in the people's mind and the way they connect, is always with the Mahabharata, always with Krishna. Krishna's passing away, last day of Mahabharata, whichever. They have to use Mahabharata text as a primary evidence. Now, I have used similar argument, although not getting into the details of KaliYuga, like the phenomenal stuff you have done. And immediately, what I get, which is instead of me telling this, I'm going to ask you that as a turn that into a question and ask for your yes and no answer. And people need to know that. And I know you have researched on this. Immediately, people will turn saying, hold on, but it is there in this text that it clearly says Kali Yuga began here, and it is says in this text. So I'm going to ask you as a yes and no answer. You can only give that as a yes and no answer for fun, but for the benefit. Does Surya Siddhanta says anywhere that Kali Yuga began in 3102 BC? I mean, based on even the planetary positions, whatever. Like, is there any evidence in Surya Siddhanta that can lead to 3102 BC as the beginning of Kali Yuga? Yes or no?
No.
No.
Emphatically, no.
Emphatically, no. It's very important people understand that, because that's a very tired and useless argument that I am tired of listening to it anyways. Second question. Is there anything in Aryabhatiya when that is used in with all proper scientific way of testing it, leads to 3102 BC as the end of as the beginning of Kali Yuga?
Again, the answer is no.
No. Okay. Let's go to the next bigger question I want to ask, and somewhat a change of gear, not into the details. This is a question I also hear, but in the context that you are bringing, like it's a Kali Yuga, but also Mahabharata. So why is the determination of the dating of Kali Yuga beginning, the Kali Yuga beginning, or say that of the Mahabharata dating? Why is this important? I mean, I get that question, but I want to get your perspective. And what will you say to those folks? Again, this is a very recurring comment I hear, who say dating is not important and we should focus on the message, like whether it's adhyatmic message, statecraft, social, the wisdom that we get from this book, health, prosperity, virtues, whatever, that is embedded in this epics such as Mahabharata. Why the determination of the dating of Kali Yuga beginning or Mahabharata is important? What is your response?
Okay, so this gets a bit tricky here. So I can start by saying for some folks, okay, for some dharmic folks, the dating of epics may not be important. But from Rajyanga perspective, I mean from statecraft, the two, especially in current scenario where we are living, finding the dating of epics is actually a must if you have to like counter the breaking India forces. Now, why do I say breaking India forces? Why did I use such big words by discussing about our Kali Yuga and Mahabharata? For example, if you find a date or if you arrive at a date for Mahabharata anywhere before 2000 BC, that will automatically debunk Aryan invasion theory, doesn't it? So your primary focus may not even be Aryan invasion theory, but just arriving at the date of Mahabharata post 2000 BC will debunk Aryan invasion theory. And also conversely, as a converse to that, if you have to prove that there was no Aryan invasion theory and that Rigveda, Mahabharata, Ramayana were actually written and happened in India, so you have to like find the geographical location, right, or spatial coordinates for events of Mahabharata and Ramayana. But now with this advancement of science, we know that our whatever universe or whatever thing we are living in, right, it is not just three-dimensional. There is one more dimension to it called time. So to identify or to locate any event in the past, just geography does not suffice. You also have to need a coordinate for time. So what does that mean? So you need to have a dating if you have to like find geographical place of anything in the past.
Yeah. All right. And very interesting. Again, I mean, I'm familiar with it, but right in the first chapter or somewhere there, second chapter, what is the Yuga? You have discussed very like different types of yuga, and by different types I don't mean Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapar Yuga, Kali Yuga. I mean that's just one kind, but the intrinsically fundamental understanding of what yuga is. I mean, is this a time? Is this a duration? Is this a duration of a specific time interval? I mean, that you have discussed in your second chapter, the different types of yuga, like that's one. And then a specific Mahabharata tradition of Kali Yuga. Okay. And I feel if people read your book, if the read and reread, if they understand the types of yuga that you're mentioning, and then the specific Mahabharata tradition of Kali Yuga, I am convinced that they will stop asking the question. Okay. Unfortunately, I was going to say Marathi saying, but I'll skip that. But unfortunately, what happens, and I can understand, it is based on possibly people's, this is we all, if we are in this Bhava Sagar, then we all have got a Bhava Roga. So from the frustrations of everyday living, family troubles, I mean, it could be anything. But the recurring questions that anytime I talk about the Yuga, and you are just focusing on the yuga, so you are going to get this more, and you must be already getting it. The question will come, so when is the Kali Yuga ending? That's what that's what the people are interested more. So I have my own thought on it, and that the thought on it, and I will add that. But I want to ask you, the expert now, what have you found for the benefit of this crowd? You can say that everyone wants to know, when is the Kali Yuga ending? What have you found?
Okay. So there is no one answer for this. Instead, I will give you 5 answers.
Oh boy, it's going to confuse them and disappoint them, but go on.
So there are actually 5 claims for the end of Kali Yuga.
Okay.
If you take Mahabharata, so I will give you one interesting information here. Okay, you take either 5561 BC or even traditional whatever calendrical epoch we are following, 3102 BCE. You are currently living in Treta Yuga, according to Yuga theory of Mahabharata. Okay, so according to Mahabharata, Kali Yuga ended long back, at least 3000 to 4000 years back, and we are currently living in Treta. And according to Yuga Purana, I have included this in my book actually. According to Yuga Purana, in 58 BCE, Kali Yuga ended and Krita Yuga began. We actually find inscriptional evidence also, corroborations also for this claim. And then Puranas, we know Puranas talk about 432,000 years of Kali Yuga. So for those who want to know when Kali Yuga is ending, don't bother. According to Puranas, it's not going to end anytime soon. And Swami Yukteswar Giri, who is actually like guru of Swami Vivekananda.
No, Paramas Yogananda, right?
Yeah, correct.
Paramas Yogananda.
Correct. My apologies. So, according to Swami Yukteswar Giri, we are currently in Dwapara. And according to him, Kali Yuga ended in 17th century, like 300 years back. And one more, like you can sort of call it as modern theory. According to Sadhguru of Isha Foundation, we are currently living in Dwapara, and in 60 years, Treta is going to begin. So, according to Sadhguru, Kali Yuga ended in 510 BCE, 2500 years ago. So that's what I said. There are like 5 different claims for end of Kali Yuga, and how can you pick one claim over the other?
Yeah.
Like how can we choose which is the primary source that can be taken? Right.
Right.
And I personally, in my subjective conviction, I cannot take Mahabharata as the primary source for end of Kali Yuga. There is a reason for that. I took Mahabharata as a primary source for beginning of Kali Yuga because it was contemporary to that event, right? But even according to Mahabharata's admission, Kali Yuga is something that is not, end of Kali Yuga is not something that is contemporary to Mahabharata. Right, so Mahabharata does not qualify to be a primary source for end of Kali Yuga.
Correct.
So this is similarly, I mean, this is similar to saying like we have Ramopakyan in Mahabharata, right, where almost entire narration of Ramayana is discussed. But we cannot take that Ramopakyan as a primary source for researching Ramayana.
Correct.
Valmiki Ramayana is the primary source for events of Ramayana, and this Mahabharata description can only be used as corroborations.
Okay. Jivan, what I find with when people ask this question, and I mean, I don't want to say it's an unfortunate question or anything, but when the KaliYuga is ending, but what happens is like that four types of yuga, not again to confuse with Satya, Treta, Dwapar, but intrinsically, I mean, is this even a time? Sometimes it's not a time. I mean, that's what I've explained with that vast PPTC framework that you have included in your book. And what I say is, that's when I was going to quote that Marathi saying I have. Marathi saying goes something like this. And this is not in a derogatory sense, but that's what the sayings do. They wake you up, that's will say Gadva pude वाचली गीता kalcha गोंधळ bara hota. For example, I have given few talks on that VASP PPT TC net framework for different types of yoga. Like there is a emotional, psychological, cosmological, and chronological. And for example, that 432,000 plus years of that you see in the Purana are actually been borrowed from the astronomy text, like Aryabhatiya and Surya Siddhanta and other texts. But they are confused now for chronology purposes. And that's what has created this confusion also. And I think you talk about that in your book. But just since there are 5 of the claims, I want to humorously say, hey, there are 5. So one more won't hurt. So humorously, I want to add one more. And the reason I mentioned that is, even when I give a talks on this framework, and people will say, okay, so yeah, thank you very much. But now tell me when it is ending, when the KaliYuga is ending, which means they did not either listen to what I said, or even if they listened to it, did not understand. So then I used to say this just now what I said, and I said, oh my God, people are almost like upset. Well, hold on, are you telling me that I did not pay attention, or are you telling me indirectly that I'm not smart enough to understand? I listened to you. I said, what's a simple way? And I think that's when even the what to speak of me, but the great sages are challenged, and many times they found a simple answer and a very effective answer, such as Hari Bhajana. Like Eknath said, like all the pakhanda, all the dogma, how do I want to kill it? I want to kill it through Hari Bhajan. So here, I want to kill this in my own simple way by giving another date. Now, of course, I'm aware that it may add to the confusion. But so therefore, when people ask me, Jeevan, on a humorous note, I would say, so today, for example, we are recording this on, say, 14th of December. And I will say, oh, so when is it ending? I will say, yeah, please have a pen and paper ready. It is going to end on 14 December 2643. Yeah. So just few years from now. And say, because ultimately you have to ask the question, how does that help them? How does it help anyone knowing when the certain yuga begins or certain yuga ends? Because ultimately they have to do something about it or do something with it. So this is my humorous answer. But with that, I want to ask you a sort of a concluding question. This is very fascinating. I mean, I can go on asking. It will really help people. But we have to stop somewhere, especially in the conference format. Let me ask you that last question. Since there are people, always the case, like you can divide them into 4 types: Artha Jidnyasu, Artharthi, Jnani Cha, Bharatarshava, 4 types of devotee. You can say 3 types of Bhakta: Kanishta Bhakta, Madhyam Bhakta, all of that. So since there are folks, people at varied levels of Shraddha, Buddhi, what you can say, which end up in being, are they extremely dogmatic? Are they extremely intelligent, dull, idiotic? You can get all these varieties, who some of them do, and others can not only comprehend the new findings of yours, meaning some of them will do, of course, but many still may struggle because of their a priori biases, 3102 BCE, 5,000 years ago, and so on. Okay. And many are not willing to give up their beliefs, even when a empirical research, even when like Atma Praman, Shastra Praman, Guru Praman tells you that what you are assuming is wrong, or what individual is assuming is wrong. What do you think, now that you have done this phenomenal work? Okay, what do you think is the best method to effectively disseminate these wonderful insights that you have found in Yuganta uh, to all different levels? I mean, to young generation, to students, to academics, to public intellectuals, to government officials, to politicians. What do you think? Now, that's a loaded question, but what are your thoughts? And we can end on that.
Okay. So I am trying my best to the best of my capabilities to spread the information or the insights that I have obtained from
Hmm.
this research of Mahabharata.
Hmm.
Like I have written a book and I am writing blogs, various articles, and I am giving talks regarding the advent of KaliYuga in various places.
Hmm.
So that is, that is what one single person can do,
Hmm.
right? I cannot stretch beyond that because that will affect my other future projects, like my other goals that what I am
Hmm.
like pursuing. For
Hmm.
example, finding the end of KaliYuga. So what I would say is the viewers or the readers of my book, they should not be just the consumer of the knowledge. Instead, I would suggest or I would request them to pick
Hmm.
up the baton
Hmm.
of passing the information. Like I come across these comments very frequently actually in my talks, that people request me to speak in their mother tongues
Hmm.
so that their family or their friends can understand. So I would say, don't let Jeevan Rao to be a dead end for the information of KaliYuga.
Hmm.
Right? You
Hmm.
you saw the talk, you understood the talk. You be the second Jeevan Rao. Like you be the torchbearer for this information. Right? You explain what you understood to
Hmm.
your friends, to
Hmm.
your family,
Hmm.
and also like as Nobel Prize winner Richard Feynman said, explaining is actually a best way to learn.
Hmm. Very true.
So even your understanding, your thought process, your clarity will improve when
Hmm.
you explain it to others. So I
Yeah.
think this is the organic way through which my research, or as a matter of fact, any information can reach the masses.
Right. No, that's great. And thank you, Jeevan, for finding time, and truly appreciate you sharing your insights in a very simple language, something that people can take it. I would encourage everyone to read the book. If Kali Yuga, Yuga in general, Indian civilization, dating of Indian sheet anchors is at your heart, you will find this book. Uh, this is not a book that you read one time and is gone. Actually, this is a phenomenal reference book on the shelf of everyone. I mean, I have it. Actually, I had put it in the other room, but usually, I have my reference books right here, some 10 of them. So after this, now it goes right down here, right on my shelf, you can say. So I would encourage everyone to do this. Again, Jivan, I want to thank you for coming to this. You want to add any last words, and we can stop.
Thank you very much, Nilesh ji, for bringing up very thought-provoking questions. The session was very interactive. And like I would again thank the organizers of this conference for giving me this opportunity to present my thoughts.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Jivan. Namaskar.